and fall asleep.
Hello, my name is Ciala Tovavaha, and today I will be presenting to you the social penetration theory. My oldest sister married her current husband, and I remember thinking, why him? He became standoffish with me a few months after meeting him, and I did not know why. I found myself evaluating all my past encounters with him, trying to figure out what could have gone wrong in our little relationship. He married my sister, and it didn't sit well with me that him and I had become so estranged. It even started to affect the strong relationship that my sister and I once had. Relationships are complex, and it can range from surface level to intimate. Either way, there are steps in order to maintain and build those relationships. In order to build relationships, we use communication, which allows for individuals to get to know themselves as well as others and enables shared experiences. Today, I will discuss the social penetration theory. I will discuss how relationships develop through gradual and reciprocal self-disclosure, as well as identifying the relationship layered stages involved in social penetration. Next, I will discuss with you how social penetration theory incorporates some form of social exchange theory. And finally, I will bring it together with reciprocity, risk, and trust. This dissection of social penetration theory will allow me to pinpoint exactly how my relationship with my brother-in-law went astray. The process from superficial to intimate levels of communication and social penetration theory is often referred to as the onion theory. For example, this can mean strangers going from unknown to becoming known by following a series of steps. According to Altman I and Taylor D, who published Social Penetration, the development of interpersonal relationships in 1973 describes how becoming more familiar with someone can resemble an onion that involves layers that are peeled away. As the relationships grow, individuals slowly peel back these layers, moving from superficial information to more personal and intimate disclosures. Most communication will start off at the surface level, the public level. This includes small talk and social norm behaviors. These gestures can communicate a kind of openness without giving away too much information. As trust grows through continuous positive encounters, conversations can move from superficial talk to open topics and eventually move into more intimate disclosures. Social penetration involves both outer communication behaviors and internal psychological processes. This includes verbal communication, tone of voice, body language, as well as trust, risk, and rewards before sharing personal information. Ronald Alden, George Rodman, and Antina Dupree, who published Understanding Human Communication, Oxford University Press in 2014, explains that self-disclosure and onion theory go hand in hand. Trust must be built in order for layers to be revealed. He emphasizes that relationships grow from peeling back layers of information of oneself. He focuses mainly on why people choose to disclose themselves and how it's done gradually and unintentionally through time. The text discusses layers of the onion, highlighting how individuals go from outer layer to inner layer. Another text that discusses layers was published in 2014 by Julia T. Wood, titled Mosaic, an introduction to the field of communication, which covers relationships moving from stranger to friends by revealing intimate information. She also mentions that superficial to intimate information requires trust, relational closeness, and risk versus rewards, which we will discuss more of later. Eventually, the relationship will evolve from public to more private, where intimate conversations will form and become more meaningful rather than just superficial conversations. This is referred to as self-disclosure, where individuals communicate information about themselves, whether aware of it or not. According to Watzlaw P. 1993, the language of change, elements of therapeutic communication, self-disclosure is most of the time unintentional. As stated previously, communication allows for individuals to get to know themselves as well as one another. What you wear and how you apply your makeup or what tattoos are exposed, all can be a form of self-disclosure. Self-disclosure usually occurs slowly rather than all at once. Sharing too much information about oneself too quickly can breach social norms, making things awkward. As we will discuss later, there are risks that come with self-disclosure. An interesting article published in 2014 by Ann Liu, Hanju Go, titled Examining Relational Risk Typology by Guanzi, Boundary Spaniards, Applying Social Penetration Theory to Guanzi, Brokering. It states that relationships can be formed by slow self-disclosure, gradually becoming more intimate over time. According to Lei Wu Ding Yi, who published Social Disclosure, Social Support and Postpartum Depression Mood in Online Social Networking, a Social Penetration Perspective in 2022, discusses how self-disclosure requires vulnerability and risk, and it usually happens when individuals trust and practice reciprocity. Now that we have talked about the onion theory and self-disclosure, I will now discuss with you layered stages of the social penetration theory. According to Irwin, Altman, and Thomas Tyler, History of Social Penetration Theory, in the Proceedings of Lauren Highlights Communication Conference published in 2011, it explains that the first stage is the orientation stage, which is most surfaced. Non-intimate and surface conversations will be given at this stage. People will naturally be more cautious and careful when disclosing information about themselves. The second stage is the exploration stage, in which things start to get a bit more personal. Here, the personality will begin to emerge, but self-disclosure is selective. People may become acquaintance or even friends here. According to Elliot Arson, Timothy D. Wilson, and Robin Arkin, who published Social Psychology in 2013, the exploration stage contains comfortable and even spontaneous conversation, but it's still a bit cautious. This stage, where they start getting to know one another, is a bit more, they start to know each other a bit more, and they become more familiar with one another. The third stage is social penetration is the affective exchange. This may look like revealing more private information. Here you will notice spontaneous and casual disclosures. According to Interpersonal Communication Everyday Encounter by Stephen Beep and Mark Redmond, published in 2017, discusses affective exchange in more depth. They describe how strong trust and emotional bonding will occur at this stage. Risk and trust come into play here, where vulnerability and private thoughts are more prevalent at this stage. The affective exchange state may also at times initiate conflict. At this time, it is safe to consider the individuals more than acquaintances and more like close friends. Finally, we have the fourth stage, which is the stable exchange stage. This stage of the friendship is carried by continuous disclosures. This stage is intimate with open expression of thoughts and feelings. The stable exchange stage is generally for romantic relationships, even family, or even very close friends. Finally, we have the deep penetration stage, where relationships return back to surface level communication. This can happen and trust will decrease and the relationship can become estranged. Although it is not part of the 4 stages of social penetration, this can happen, and it's more of an extension concept rather than one of the stages. The last stage is intense, but it has happened, leaving relationships unmendable. A first look at communication theory by Griffin, published in 2015, talks more about the deep penetration stage. The text describes it as a peel back in reverse, where self-disclosure becomes less and less, and the relationships become less personal over time and even more distant. This stage is to be avoided if possible. Moving past relationship stages, social penetration can show signs of social exchange theory. According to Amanda Carpenter, Catherine Green, and Social Penetration Theory in the Interpersonal Encyclopedia of Interpersonal Communication, published on July 16, 2023, social penetration theory incorporates some form of social exchange theory. That is when relationships are made up of a give and take situation. In other words, the relationship can become reliant on an economic framework in which rewards or resources and costs are exchanged, benefiting both parties. People tend to avoid individuals who are found undesirable. For example, costs in a relationship are experiences that individuals want to avoid. Costs can be efforts, gifts, paying for dates, or even time and energy that is invested into relationships. People will avoid relationships that add no personal benefits to them, therefore making the relationship more of a reward cost investment. Relationships like this tend to develop more quickly when they are positive self-disclosures experienced, or do not develop at all if the pros outweigh the cons, depending. When people do find benefits in being together, this can build a positive and healthy relationship where further self-disclosure can happen. According to Reyes, H.T., and Shaver, P., who published Intimacy as an Interpersonal Process and Handbook of Personal Relationship in 1988, he states that social exchange can lead to intimacy through self-disclosure. The growing relationship at this point will be at a stable exchange, and as we discussed earlier. Next, we have the self-disclosure, which involves risk and trust. Revealing personal thoughts or experiences is risky because it may open the window for possible rejection or even criticism. Therefore, people limit their openness when it comes down to disclosing deeper information about themselves. According to Joseph Darla, V.J. Metz, who published Self-Disclosure, Sage publication in 1993, highlights that self-disclosure involves risks. Loss of privacy is something to consider, and trust can be broken if intimate information is revealed. In contrast, if trust is high, people tend to disclose more deeply versus if the trust was low. Disclosure, therefore, becomes more surfaced. Another article published in 2022 titled Boundaries of Privacy, Dialect of Disclosure by Sandra Petronio states that people are able to manage boundaries by what they disclose, which therefore makes sharing private information risky. Once you allow someone into your personal life, it is like lowering your boundaries, risking potential exposure to one's privacy. Another text that I found interesting was published by Irwin Otwin, Dalman Taylor, and Seth Chuckin in 1981, titled Social Penetration Theory in L. Broick Edition, Advanced and Experimental Social Psychology, because it discusses how trust can only be made if risk is worth the cost. In other words, self-disclosure can only be done if cost-reward is present. This is interesting because it makes relationships seem more reward-based rather than real organic chemistry. In the article, Interplay, The Process of Interpersonal Communication by Ronald B. Alden, Lawrence B. Roosevelt, and Russell F. Proctor, published in 2018, goes into more detail about risk and trust. They explain that building trust in a relationship is essential for self-disclosure, and individuals must take risks by lowering those guards in order to encounter a positive interaction, reciprocal disclosure. Another important principle is reciprocity. Reciprocity is when a person shares personal information in hopes that the listener will respond with relatable energy. This exchange will reduce distance and build connections. However, people still have control over how much intel they choose to expose about themselves. For example, in regards to social media, according to the article Extending Social Penetration Theory to Facebook, published in December 2021 by Natalie Pennington, it suggests that research has found that communication through Facebook represents how users recognize the relationship outside of Facebook. As discussed previously, social penetration explains that relationships develop through exchange of personal information, and only time will allow for certain interactions to deepen emotionally by continuously revealing the layered elements of their personality. Social media like Facebook allows for users to reveal carefully selective information about themselves, which is a form of calculated self-disclosure. It can also imply situational context, which is one of the 3 factors that affect what people choose to disclose. This is important since we live in a time where social media is very prevalent in our lives. As stated before, layers can be removed if appropriate stages are produced. According to Payne Carter N., who published Social Penetration Theory EBSCO Research Starter in 2022, states that 2 factors affect what people choose to disclose. First is personal characteristics, such as whether or not they are introvert or extrovert. Second is outweighing the reward or cost associated with disclosing information. Connections can grow through mutual openness as people move from more casual to more deeper emotional relationship. Before layers can be removed, mutuality must be practiced by both parties involved. According to Robert C. Cuoto, who wrote the book Influence, Science and Practice in 2009, he claims that most people feel obligated to return kindness or gifts due to the pressures of social norms. He explains that people tend to look for rewards for their good behavior. For example, in the book, CDR describes that Reagan 1971 Coke experiment where participants receive a Coke from another participant. This later proves beneficial because when the same person asks those same participants to buy raffle tickets, they don't just buy raffle tickets, they end up buying an unexpected amount. They felt obligated to reciprocate. It is human nature to respond positively when treated well. Another article published by Russell Carbanzo and Mario S. Mitchell, who wrote the article Social Exchange Theory, an interdisciplinary review in 2005, states that social reciprocity is when a relationship is built on future expectations of kindness. For example, if I choose to reveal something personal to a classmate, I'm expecting empathy in return. I have a future expectation of kindness. This can keep the interactions going, which can lead to another peeled layer. As I conclude this presentation, I will leave you with one final thought. Building strong bonds does not happen overnight. It takes time, it takes vulnerability, and it takes patience. Trust can only happen with self-disclosure, and self-disclosure will not happen without understanding and without trust. In regards to my relationship with my brother-in-law, him and I do not speak. Our so-called relationship could not move beyond the surface level interactions. I know now that connection can only be acquired if both parties lower their guards in order to meet each other with reciprocity and understanding. Social penetration theory reminds us that all relationships start at the superficial level, but can only progress through vulnerability, time, and trust, and only then can partnerships evolve into a strong, long-lasting, beautiful relationship. Thank you for your time with me for my presentation.